this time, the little things, with the point being, if we don't do what might be considered little things before the Lord, we're not going to do big things. We're not going to do, because if we can't follow the simple, that might not be the right word, simple. Because nothing that we've talked about in the little things is simple for us. At least it's not for me. But God has an order to things. Just like you have to be saved before you can be a servant. And you can do all kinds of things that appear to be for the Lord, but if you're not saved, you're not His servant. And those things He may even get glory out of, because He's going to get glory wherever He wants to get it. But it ain't going to do you any good if you don't belong to the Lord. And then we can belong to the Lord, and if we don't do the little things, if we don't follow Him in every way, you can't jump into what we consider big things. And we've given examples how that Daniel was doing what in the eyes of the world, but it was an insignificant thing by keeping himself from the king's meat, but eating only what he believed God wanted him to eat, to not profane himself before the Lord. And he went on to be a great, faithful witness, prophet of the Lord. And but he kept doing those things that in a lot of people's eyes are little things. Even that prayer 3 times a day. And we all know that prayer is not a little thing. But in the eyes of the world, it is. In fact, in the eyes of the world, it's pretty useless. Especially nowadays, the way people view things, it's useless. It's just something to make you feel better. It's really what I've even had people telling me that. Well, if that makes you feel better, But it does make me feel better if I'm doing it right. If I'm really praying to God and not just saying words. But we're not going to be faithful in the big things, what we consider big things. I'll have to admit, sometimes I think what we consider big things, it's just not how God looks at it. He looks at, are we just doing what He wants us to do? Brother Wayne's preached this many times, doing what God wants you to do. Whatever that is. Well, today, we're kind of getting off the track, and because we've been talking about Danby and those parts of our life. Because if we're not there, again, we're not going to, if we don't do the things in those parts of our lives, honestly, it doesn't matter what we do in the rest. Because there's something missing there. Now, sometimes you can be in those aspects, of like with your children or your spouses, and if they may not be believers or they may not be wanting to follow the Lord, and you can't, it may not look right, but as long as you're doing what God says your part is, because it even talks about if you have a lost spouse, whether you're the man or the husband or the wife, it even talks about as long as they're willing to stay with you, you stay with them. As long as, and to the point that you would win them, not by beating them over the head, but by just the way you are, the way you live, the way you serve the Lord, the way you trust the Lord in everything. But sometimes we just get the idea that those are insignificant things when they really are not. And I think the study of Daniel and then just what God even commands in the New Testament concerning husbands and wives and fathers and mothers, children, it just tells us where the true service starts. But today I want to kind of, we're not getting away from that. It's just I want to take a look at a different person. Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, we're going to read starting with verse 1. It says, when he was come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. Of course, he is Jesus Christ. And he said, great multitudes followed him. And behold, there came a leper who worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, said, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Which, he touched him. Did Christ have to touch the leper to make him clean? No. But he did. But he did. And I guarantee you, maybe it doesn't say anything right here, but if the Pharisees were there and saw that, you can't be right. You are not supposed to do that. But he did. And he touches us in salvation. And we are not clean. But he touches us in salvation. And he touched this leper. And immediately he was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, See, thou tell no man, but go that way, and show thyself to the priest, and offer the gift as Moses commanded for the testimony unto them. Said, you go tell the priest. Don't you broadcast this out. You just go tell the priest, as according to the law of Moses, offer the gift as Moses commanded. Now that's not what our lesson is about. What I want to talk about today is verse 5. And this is not a new story. You all know this story. And when Jesus entered Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. Now one thing you have to understand, this was a centurion. More than likely he was not a Jew. To be a centurion, that means you were in the Roman army. Now, could he have been a Jew? He could have been a Jew. Was he a Jew? I don't know. I personally don't think so, because of what Christ says afterwards. But he was a Roman soldier, but not only a Roman soldier, he was the leader of a band of soldiers, a centurion. He wasn't just your common soldier. He was a leader. But he said, Lord, my servant lieth at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. He wasn't just slightly sick. He didn't have a cold or a sprained ankle. He had the palsy, which in the little word here it says that means paralyzed. I don't know. Whatever it was, it's bad. It said he's grievously tormented. And Jesus said unto him, I will come and heal him. Jesus was always doing things that didn't seem to fit the status quo. You know, he went to eat with sinners. Now, he didn't go to the bar with them. That is not what he did. I've heard people do that before. Well, you got to go there to win. No. That's not what Jesus did. He went to their house and he ate with them. And the only reason the Pharisees didn't like it was because they weren't, these people he went to eat with were not Pharisees. They were not righteous in the sense of the Pharisees' view. They were tax collectors. They were publicans. And there were some pretty people there that were in a bad way, living a bad life. They were sinners. The problem was the Pharisees didn't understand they were too. They kept looking at their works and their clothes, you know, because they wore fancy clothes too to proclaim how righteous they were. But here this centurion, he came begging Christ that he would heal his servant because he was very sick. And Jesus said, I will come and heal him. I'm going to go to that house. Christ was not too much concerned about what the Pharisees and the Sadducees thought about his actions. He knew what his actions were, that his actions were righteous, that he only did what his Father wanted him to do. He was a great example for us as we live. As we've been saved, we're to do what our Father wants us to do. He said, I will come and heal him. And the centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof. So that's another thing too, you think about it. And sometimes we don't think about this like this, but for Christ to go to his house and to go in his house, that was a sign of, I don't know if you would say friendship, but certainly familiarity. And I don't know if the centurion could be the centurion understood more about the Jews than they gave him credit for. Could be that he didn't want to cause Christ any trouble. I don't know. I kind of suspect that, he knew that it wasn't right necessarily for Christ to come to his place. In the eyes of the Jews anyway. And you can figure another thing, they fussed about him going to the publicans and different things, but this guy was not, he was someone that was they were captive in their own land. And this guy represented that. Because he was a captain of the Roman soldiers that were in that area of Capernaum. I know. I may just be guessing. I think part was he didn't want to cause Christ problems. Because he knew that would not go well. But there again, it may just be that he was just a humble enough man that he felt that he understood who Christ was. I firmly believe he understood who Christ was. That he just didn't feel worthy that Christ would even come under his roof. But he said, Lord, I'm not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. You think about that fellow that had come to Christ when his son was very sick. And he begged him to come, and that he would touch him and heal him. And Christ talked to him a little bit. And then he said, finally, he said, you just go on home. Said, he's healed. And he went home. And I don't think he ran either. I think he just went. Because then the servants met him on the way and said, he's healed. He asked what time it was. Well, then he knew exactly. It was the exact same time. But this man says, all you've got to do is say so, Lord, and my servant will be healed. I know that. He said, for I am a man under authority. Now, he's telling here, he's not the big boss. He's under authority of someone else. But he also has soldiers under him. He says, I have having soldiers under me. And I say to this man, go, and he goeth, and to another, come, and he cometh, and to my servant, do this, and he doeth it. He understood the chain of command. He wasn't the big boss. He had someone over him, and he followed those orders. He had men under him that he delegated what they were to do, and they did it. And he's saying that to say, I understand authority, and I see your authority, and I know that you are. And I'm paraphrasing, but I know that you have authority. And I personally believe he believed that Jesus was the Messiah that he had heard about from the Jews. And when Jesus heard it, he marveled and said unto them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said unto the centurion, go that way, as thou hast believed, so it shall be done unto thee. And his servant was healed that selfsame hour. And as we see here, Christ turned and said to those that were following him. I think the 12 that were there, however many of them may have been there, I don't know if they were all there or not. I kind of think they probably, not all of them were, but I know there were others. They had been following him, and they were there and following. He turned and looked at him and said, I haven't seen this kind of faith in Israel, the children of God. He said, I haven't seen this kind of faith. No, not in Israel. And then he gives a inclination that even King David knew about, and some of the older prophets even knew. They didn't quite understand it, but they knew about it. And he mentions it here. He says, I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and she'll sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. He's not talking about other Jews. Or I don't think so. He's talking about Gentiles from the east, from the west. It says, but the children, and that's why I think it's not, I mean, at this time you could think, well, no, he's talking about Jews because they were already scattered all over, which was true. But I think he's talking about Gentiles because he says, but the children, which was the Jews. A lot of them, he said, are not going to be there because they don't believe. They haven't believed and trusted. He said, but he said, I say unto you that many, and this is a great blessing to us Gentiles, that the gospel was given to us, that we might hear it, that we might believe and be saved. Verse 13 says, unto the centurion, go thy way, as thou hast believed, so it be done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the selfsame hour. I guarantee you the Pharisees didn't like this at all. Because they didn't like it even when he went into the Jewish people's places, if they weren't Pharisees or Sadducees, or what was considered religious. I just find this very interesting story. A factual story. It's not a fairy tale, it's the truth. And I find it so interesting because Christ is the example for us as we live and follow the Lord, and not to pick and choose who we think we should talk to. And it's easy to be guilty of that, unfortunately. But that's not how Christ wants us to be. He doesn't want us to pick and choose who we talk to about Christ. Because the thing is, we cannot know who's going to listen and who's not. We can't. There's no way. And one thing about it, we certainly are not God to pick and choose. We are not. That's the one thing we are not to do. We're to just speak to people about the Lord, no matter what their circumstances are, whether it's we maybe want to avoid someone because they're a little too rough for us or whatever. We're not to do that. By the same token, we're not necessarily to pick someone who they'll receive it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't talk to them, but that should not be the reason because we think they're primed to receive it. We're just to tell the story of Christ and what He's done to save us from our sin. I think this story is especially for us Gentiles, it is a great story, a true story. And Christ even said, I'm telling you right now, folks, and I'm paraphrasing here, you're going to see this a lot. He said, because there's going to be many come from the east and west that'll be in the kingdom. And He's telling them right there, that are listening, these Jews, but many of you are not going to be there because you won't believe. Because what had happened here? What was the really big thing that happened here that would prompt Him to say this? Because a Gentile, a soldier in the Roman army who was over them, they were occupying Israel, had come in faith, believing that Jesus Christ was the Messiah. I think that's what he believed. I don't think he thought Christ was just a healer. I think he believed that Christ was the Son of God. I think he believed that Christ was the Master. And he came in faith believing that Christ could heal his servant. And I personally believe he was already saved. That's just what I think. May be right, may not be, I don't know. He certainly knew who Christ was, though, and that he had the authority. See, that's the thing. He understood not only that Christ was a great person, a great man, that people were listening to him and following him, but he understood Christ had power. And not only just the power to heal, but the authority. See, that's it. He understood that Christ had the authority. He recognized that authority that Christ had. He said, and then Christ said this to all these people around him, and then he turned and said, "You go ahead. You going back home?" Said, "It's done. It's done. Just as you believed, it is done. You believe that I could heal him?" I mean, this centurion looked at it as a fact. If you will do this, and he was begging him to do it. He was begging him to do it. But he said, if you will do this, he'll be healed. I know it's the truth. And after Christ made the statement about what this was showing to these people around him, these Jews around him, about the gospel and salvation, and the kingdom of God also was going to include Gentiles, he then looked at that man and said, "Go ahead, it's done." And his servant was healed that self-same hour. As you go through the rest of this chapter, of course, they went to Peter's house, and his mother-in-law was sick, healed her. And then the rest of the chapter, it talks about others that came, and he healed and cast out demons and devils. And then people would say, "I'm going to follow you." And they would have excuses why they couldn't right then. And Christ said, "No, you need to follow now if you're going to follow now." But what I want to get to is, and we'll finish up here real quick. I don't want to take too much longer here, but as we look down through the rest of this chapter, we see we're in verse 14 through 16. He talked about Peter's mother-in-law was healed, and when evening has come, they brought possessed of devils and spirits and healed the sick. And then verse 17 says that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, "He himself took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses." And verse 18 says, "Now when Jesus saw great multitudes about him, he gave commandment to depart unto the other side." And then, of course, here's one said, certain scribe came and said, "Master, I will follow thee whatsoever thou goest." And Jesus said unto him, "The foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, suffer me first go and bury my father." In other words, he wanted to wait until his obligation to his father was over, then he would come. And Jesus said, follow me, let the dead bury the dead. And he wasn't being mean. He just meant, no, you go ahead and follow me if you're going to follow me. And other things shouldn't get in the way. Now, does that mean that this man was not under the obligation if and when his father passed away to take care of that? No, that's not what it's talking about. It just meant the duty to follow our duty to follow is not to be put off, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not to be put off. And as we said, as we began this study at the beginning of the month, there's things that Christ requires of us as people, as husbands, as fathers, as people, that we're to do. And if we can't do those things, which is considered little things, especially in the eyes of the world, we're not going to do the things, what we would say are big. It all boils down to being obedient to Christ. That's what it all boils down to. But I want to get to real quick here just to finish. Now, think about all the stuff that we've just talked about in this little section here. The centurion. Because this wasn't hidden there, okay? That wasn't hidden. It was open. Because Christ turned and looked at the other people and said, "I haven't seen this kind of faith. No, not in Israel." What I'm trying to say is all this, it wasn't hidden. It went off to the side. It wasn't in secret. Went to Peter's house. Mother-in-law was healed. And they brought these others. All was casting out demons and healing people. People wanted to follow, but they weren't quite ready yet. And he kept saying, "No, you need to follow now." But then verse 23, now you got to remember that core group is with him. They had been seeing things, listening, hearing things. And they get here and it said, when he entered in the ship, his disciples followed him. Behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him, woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. He said to them, why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Were they surprised? They were. Would the centurion have been surprised? No. Not at all. I don't think so. I might be wrong about that. But I think even those following Christ close, they lacked some things. But he was teaching them. I mean, that's why he was with them for that long. He was teaching them. Because we do see what happened when he was crucified and then left. I mean, there was a change, some big changes, and some of them were, I mean, they were saved already, but big changes. Here, they were still learning. They didn't have as much understanding. Honestly, they did not have as much understanding about Christ as the centurion did. They really didn't. I don't mean they were bad people. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they hadn't grown as much as that centurion had. Because he said they were amazed what he had done then. Now, is it a small thing to calm the sea? No, it's not. But still, they were amazed. After seeing all they had seen, they were still amazed to see this happen. And we're not going to go ahead and go into any more of this. I just wanted to kind of finish this up for the month and still say, if we can't trust in the small things, the things God commands us, we're not going to be able to do what we consider big things. And honestly, God really looks at the little things. He really does. But to him, it's all little. Really. I mean, what we consider big, he doesn't. He just says, believe. Trust me, follow me, believe what I'm telling you, and do what I'm telling you. And trust me with it all. And we need to be like the centurion. Faith. That's what it boils down to. Just believe in what God says. In everything. In everything. Okay, let's stand.